You are tired in a way that sleep does not fix. You know exactly what I mean. Not the tired that comes from a hard week or a difficult month, the tired that lives in a deeper place than that. The kind that is still there when you wake up in the morning, still there after the coffee, still there when you close your eyes at night and lie in the dark and try to remember the last time you felt genuinely certain that any of this was working. You have been praying, you have been faithful, you have done everything you know to do, and some things you did not know how to do but did anyway because you were desperate, and desperate people try everything. And the silence from heaven right now is not the comfortable silence of someone who is present but quiet. It is the other kind, the kind that makes you wonder if the line has been disconnected, if the address you have been sending everything to has been vacant longer than you realized. And somewhere in the last few days or the last few weeks, you have had a thought that you have not said out loud to anyone because saying it out loud makes it real. The thought that maybe you are done, not dramatically, not with a declaration, just done in the way a person gets done when they have given everything they have to something for a very long time and cannot find a single visible sign that any of it made any difference at all. I need you to stay with me right now, because what I am about to tell you is the thing nobody told me when I was in the exact place you are sitting. And if someone had told me, I think it would have changed everything about how I survived it. The night before your breakthrough is the darkest night you will ever have. Not the second darkest, the darkest. And the cruelest part of it is that from inside it, it feels completely identical to the night before everything finally falls apart for good. You cannot tell the difference. That is not a failure of your faith. That is the nature of the darkness. The church teaches you how to fight. It teaches you to resist, to stand firm, to put on the armor, to pray without ceasing, to fast, to believe, to confess Scripture, to hold on. And all of that is real, and all of that matters. But nobody in any service I ever sat through, nobody in any book I ever read, prepared me for what it actually feels like in the specific silence that comes right before everything changes. Nobody told me that the silence before the victory sounds exactly like the silence before the surrender. Nobody told me that the exhaustion that precedes breakthrough feels physically indistinguishable from the exhaustion that precedes collapse. Nobody prepared me for the cruelty of not being able to know which one I was in. I knew a man named David. He had been in a fight for his marriage for 3 years, not a small fight. The kind of fight that rewires you. He had prayed through things that would have ended most people. He had stayed in rooms he wanted to leave. He had chosen, over and over again with everything in him, to believe that what he was fighting for was worth what it was costing him. And on a Tuesday night in November, he sat in his car in a parking lot outside his house and decided he was done. He had made the decision. He had thought it through. He was not angry anymore. He was just empty. And he sat there in that car with the engine running, and he was about to go inside and say the thing that could not be unsaid. And then his phone lit up. Not a call, a text, from a number he barely recognized. A man from his church he had not spoken to in 2 years. The text said simply, I do not know why I am sending this, but I felt like I needed to tell you that I have been praying for you today. That was it. No prophecy, no word of knowledge. Just a man who felt something and acted on it. David sat in that car for another 45 minutes, and then he went inside, and he did not say the thing. 3 weeks later, his marriage turned in a direction that neither of them could have engineered or predicted. 3 weeks. He was 3 weeks away from the thing he had been fighting for years to reach. He almost made a permanent decision 45 minutes before the tide started turning. And he would not have known. He could not have known. That is the thing that makes the darkness before breakthrough so dangerous. You are making decisions at the worst possible moment with the least possible visibility and the highest possible stakes. And now I need to show you something in Scripture that I did not see for years because I was reading these stories as inspiration instead of as information. Joseph spent years in slavery, then he spent years in prison, not months, Years in a pit, years in a cell, years of watching his life go in the exact opposite direction of the dreams he had been given. And the night before Pharaoh dreamed the dream that would change everything, Joseph was still in that prison. Nothing had shifted. There was no sign, there was no word. There was nothing but another night in a cell that had already held him longer than he ever imagined it could. Elijah had just called fire from heaven. He had just won one of the most dramatic spiritual victories recorded in the entire Old Testament. And then one woman threatened him, and something broke in him so completely that he ran into the wilderness, sat under a tree, and asked God to let him die. He said, "I have had enough." This is the man who called fire from heaven, saying, "I have had enough." And the next thing God does is not rebuke him or challenge him or tell him to get back up and fight. He sends an angel to feed him. Because Elijah was not in a crisis of faith. He was in a crisis of exhaustion. And God knew the difference, even when Elijah did not. And then Peter. On the worst night of his life, sitting by a fire in the courtyard of the man who would sentence Jesus to death, having just denied 3 times that he even knew the person he had left everything to follow. He did not go home and sleep and wake up restored. He went out and wept bitterly. That is where Peter was the night before the resurrection, weeping, broken, sitting with the worst thing he had ever done. 3 days later, Jesus was standing on a shore cooking breakfast and calling him back. But Peter did not know that when he was weeping. He could not see what 3 days would bring. And that is the pattern. Every single time. Joseph, Elijah, Peter. The night before everything changed was the worst night any of them had experienced. Not coincidentally, specifically. And here is where I need to tell you why it gets darker right before it breaks. The first reason is the one that should make you actually angry rather than afraid. The enemy knows what is coming before you do. He does not know everything, but he is ancient and he is watching. And when he sees the movement of heaven toward your situation, he does not retreat. He intensifies. He cannot stop what is coming, but he can try to get you to walk away from it before it arrives. The whisper that says you are done, it is too late. Nothing is going to change. This is just who your life is now. That whisper gets louder right before your situation does. That is not random. That is targeted. The second reason is harder to receive, but it is the most important one. God is doing the deepest work in the darkest moment. Not the most dramatic work, the deepest. The final shaping before release. You do not put something in the fire because you want to destroy it. You put it in the fire because fire does something to certain materials that nothing else can do. It removes what cannot remain, and it reveals what was always there underneath, and the fire does its most significant work in the moments right before the thing is ready to come out. The third reason is the one that costs the most. In the darkness, right before breakthrough, God is removing the last thing you were leaning on that was not Him. The last strategy. The last backup plan. The last person you were half trusting alongside Him. He empties the hand so it can receive what it could not hold while it was full of something else. And that emptying feels like loss. It feels like being left with nothing. It feels like the floor giving way. Because it is. The floor is giving way. But what you do not know from inside the falling is that you are not falling down. Let me tell you what the darkness actually feels like from inside it, because I think you need someone to name it out loud. It feels like exhaustion that follows you into sleep and is waiting for you when you wake up. Like the weight never actually lifts anymore, just redistributes. It feels like prayer that used to be conversation has become something closer to leaving voicemails for someone you are no longer sure is there. It feels like reading words you have read 100 times and feeling nothing in them. Not resistance, just flatness. It feels like watching people around you move forward and standing completely still and not being able to explain why. Not for lack of effort, not for lack of faith, just still. Like something invisible has its hand on your shoulder and you have been pushing against it for so long that your arms have stopped working the way they used to. It feels like the version of yourself that believed easily and trusted without effort has been replaced by a version that has to work for every inch of faith it can find, and the working is exhausting in a way that the early easy belief never was. It feels like being on the edge of a decision, you should not make from here, but feeling like you might make it anyway, because the alternative is more of this, and you are not sure you have more of this left in you. I need to tell you about the night I was in this darkness. Not generally, specifically. There was a night where I sat in a room alone and I made a list. Not a dramatic list. Just a quiet, honest accounting of what I had given and what I had received, and whether the math made any sense anymore. And the math did not make sense. And I came very close to making a decision that night that I cannot fully describe, but that would have altered the entire trajectory of everything that came after. What stopped me was not a miracle. It was not a word from God. It was the simple inability to imagine explaining to someone I loved why I had done it. That was all. A thought that small, a rope that thin. And I am standing here now because of it. And I understand things now that I could not have understood then, because the thing I was on the edge of walking away from was the exact thing I was weeks away from seeing move. So how do you survive the night before you do not know is before the breakthrough? Not with a formula, not with a strategy, with one commitment and one commitment only. You do not make permanent decisions from this darkness, not tonight. Whatever the darkness is telling you is permanent about your situation. You do not act on it tonight. Not because it is definitely wrong, but because you cannot see clearly from here, and permanent decisions deserve more visibility than this darkness provides. You do not have to feel faith tonight. You do not have to perform certainty you do not have. You do not have to tell anyone you are okay if you are not okay. You just have to decide that the decisions that cannot be undone will wait until the light comes back. That is the whole assignment for tonight. Just that. Giving up and letting go are not the same thing. Giving up is a door you close. Letting go is releasing your grip on controlling the outcome. One ends the story. The other creates space for a different ending than the one you have been trying to force. What holding on looks like when you have almost nothing left is not impressive. It does not look like worship or courage or great faith. It looks like a person sitting in a parking lot for 45 minutes before going inside. It looks like not sending the message, not making the call, not walking out the door. It looks like one more night. Just one more night. I want to talk directly to you now. The one watching this at an hour when most people are asleep. The one who typed something into a search bar tonight because you needed someone to say something true and you did not know where else to look. I know where you are. I know what the room feels like. I know what the silence sounds like when you have been in it this long. And I know that everything in you right now is measuring the distance between where you started and where you are and finding it unbearable. I am not going to tell you it is going to be okay. I am not going to promise you something I cannot guarantee. What I am going to tell you is this. The darkness you are in right now is a specific kind of darkness. It is not the darkness of someone who has been abandoned. It is not the darkness of someone whose story is over. It is the darkness that comes right before the thing you have been fighting for finally moves. And you cannot see that from inside it. You cannot feel it. You cannot know it for certain, but you can make one decision tonight. Just one. You can decide that the permanent things will wait until morning, and morning will come. Leave a comment below and tell me where you are tonight. Not the polished version, the real one. Because someone else is going to read what you write, and it is going to be the thing that keeps them here. Share this with the person in your life who is close to done. Not to fix them. Just so they know that someone sees the darkness they are in and is not afraid of it. Subscribe because what comes next in this series goes somewhere even more important than tonight. And the last thing I want to say is this. The fact that you are still here, the fact that you watched this entire video when everything in you wanted to close it, that is not nothing. That is actually the whole thing. One more night. Just one more night.